And let's start with Saudi Aramco, because it's one of the largest. It's got annual revenues well into the sort of $200 billion mark. It's a state-owned oil company in Saudi Arabia. The history was that it came into ownership in full of the Saudi government over a period from the 1950s to the 1980s. The reason it's on the list, though, is that it plans to bring a portion of its equity to the market in 2018, apparently, at which point it could be one of the world's largest and most valuable companies by far. Because if you compare its valuations to that of other oil companies, with its production, it ought to be much larger than Apple, much larger than anything, into the trillions of dollars of market cap.
So it produces about, I think, 15% of global daily needs.
15% of the world's oil production from this one company.
And they have about 8 years worth of global production in reserves.
Ongoing reserves.
Yeah. So,
and those reserves are, broadly speaking, onshore and offshore Saudi Arabia. I mean, some of those substantial fields that kind of go underneath the oil producing region there in the Persian Gulf.
260 billion barrels of oil. I mean, that's just such a big number. I can't even begin to quantify. And they also have, as you said, natural gas assets.
Yeah.
But I think in their case, why it's important to list is probably to extract value in order for ongoing projects, because they know there's a finite timeline on here, which is why oil companies have a lower valuation relative to the rest of the market.
Okay, but look, I mean, Saudi Aramco has got 15% of world production. I think ExxonMobil, which is the largest of the US, has probably got 1% or something. I mean, subject, it might be 3, it might be half, but it's way smaller and it's worth, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars. The problem I would have here is, first of all, they're only going to list 5 or 10%. Second of all, it's still going to be controlled by this kind of rather murky royal family in Saudi, which seems to be in a bit of a transition, right? I mean, King Salman has just taken his son and appointed him the crown prince.
He's 31 years old.
And how would you know whether or not, you know, they're going to be making sound decisions? Because if you're a small, tiny minority shareholder, if it lists in 2018 and you buy the shares, you know, how would you know that they're going to make decisions in the best interest of the company and you, the minority shareholder, as opposed to their own national, you know, prerogatives?
Well, I think maybe one reason why they are listing it is they're probably hungry for cash, because in a world of $100 a barrel, which it was for 3 years, happy days, and they could spend on Social Security, and the citizens are, they need all the associated benefits from the higher oil prices.
It's a good point, because I've noticed there's a whole lot of things going on in Saudi at the moment. They're trying to raise fuel prices. They're starting to implement more taxes.
VAT for the first time.
At a fairly low level, but they're trying to normalize their economy, because they've had too much, in a way, of like all this lolly coming from the big oil revenues, and they want to now look for a post-oil kind of economy and have more normalized financials.
I think maybe if you could view it like the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, just maybe 30 or 40 years behind.
And that's probably correct. So what they'll do is, once they've listed Aramco, they'll either take the proceeds of the IPO, or they will take a portion of the government stake and stick it into a sovereign wealth fund in order to stabilize their economy. Okay, but the real question is, I'm sort of leaning now towards the hot or not issues. If they were to list, would you be interested in buying them? And secondly, what is the outlook for the company's revenues and profits, given that oil seems to be sort of hovering at $50 a barrel?
I think not good. I think we're definitely in a world where consumption of oil, I wouldn't say it's peaked, because they sell a lot to the Far East. So China's a big customer of theirs, and they're still going to buy a lot of motor vehicles. But the astonishing rate at which the trajectory of electronic e-vehicles is rising, plus also efficiencies, makes the long-term outlook for oil patchy.
Plus, we know the US frackers are always lurking. So
and
the
they're getting
oil
more profitable.
prices go higher, then they come
100%.
in. And also they move out of the market when it goes lower. So what we could expect is a sort of stable band. And maybe that's why the Saudi Aramco listing has been somewhat slow to come to the market, because they would prefer, obviously, oil prices to be higher. And the Saudis have been doing their best within OPEC to get oil prices to go higher. To no
It hasn't
effect.
worked. It hasn't worked.
So not hot on this one.
Not hot,
And if
I'm
it did
afraid.
list, there'd be 2 issues to worry about. Is that outlook, firstly, and secondly, the whole issue of corporate governance, transparency, and valuations.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Well, that was interesting.